birthday early. Happy birthday, little guys. I actually work tonight, so I wanted to show you guys how I set up a brooder when we have newly hatched chicks. Now, I won't go over the whole brooding process now because, well, frankly, I've missed half of it already for the last 21 days that I didn't record anything. But I will tell you that this process, while they're hatching, can take 24 to 48 hours, depending on when the first one starts and the last one ends. And after these guys come out of the egg, they are exhausted, and they will sit in here in the nice warm incubator and dry off while the rest of their brothers and sisters come out. So when a baby chick hatches, the first thing it needs is warmth. It does not need food or water for about 72 hours after it hatches, because when the chick is born, it absorbs the yolk from inside the egg, which sustains its nutrition for up to 72 hours. That's why hatcheries can ship baby chicks right after they're born to your door, and that's how you get them alive still. But these guys need to be kept at a warm temperature. This incubator is currently at 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I'm setting up my brooder, the first thing I would consider is the flooring. I do want a soft padded flooring, and I have a bag of sawdust that I'm gonna use. I'm also gonna put down some paper towels on top of that. I also have a little chick brooder that I will be placing in there. And these guys will not go into that brooder until all of them are dry. Now, like I said, this process can take from 24 to 48 hours. So you do want to leave this incubator on for up to 24 hours after the hatch date, just to make sure all the eggs that are going to hatch do. So this is the brooding plate we have. It's made by Brooder. I do not own the brooding plate, as well as I do not own the incubator. If you recall before, if you've watched any of my other videos, we do share appliances with the neighbors. And then once each of us, she incubated the last round, I incubated this one. It's just a sharing of work. And that way we both don't have to make expensive purchases to raise chickens. And this was the brood coop I used for the meat birds last time. I showed y'all how we made it as well. It's super simple. But I will not be using it for these chickens because there's just too much space in here for one heater. And there's only going to be, I mean, these little birds are going to take up like that much room in this box. So what I'm actually going to use is this just plastic tote that we have that is a lot smaller with high walls. They're not going to be jumping out anytime soon. They are way too little. And you do not have to have a fancy setup for little baby chicks. I will show you how I set this up, and then actually what I'm going to use to feed and water them for their first week or two, because they are so small and they don't need a lot. They don't need a huge fancy box or fancy waters or fancy feeders. Although I do have a nice feeder, it will be used when they are older. I'm not doing that right now. This is one water that I have that I will be using when they are older, but for now, this well is too deep. It's over an inch deep, and I don't want their little tiny heads to drown as they're trying to come in here and get water. But let's set up this brooder, and I'll show you what I use to feed and water them right after. Now, you don't have to use sawdust. You can use anything that you can get your hands on, something you can afford. Newspaper pieces, I've seen straw used, but it can be a little pokey. What I do recommend is, if you buy sawdust, is to buy the actual shavings and not the really high dusty sawdust. And that's because you just don't want anything irritating these little babies' lungs. Also, I do put paper towels over the sawdust, although it's not required. It's just something that I like to do. It gives them a little bit more traction. There is a history of, super baby chicks, 1-3 a week old. They are very unsure on their feet, and they can slip around on the sawdust. So I just put the paper towels over for that first week to help them have more traction while they're walking around. I'm going to talk a little bit about the feed I use and feeding them in general. So just because they can not eat for 72 hours doesn't mean they shouldn't. So once all these chicks are dry in the incubator and you put them in the brooder that they're going to be in, have food and water ready. First off, they need water. But secondly, they will start pecking at things right when they get out of their shell. They'll start pecking at the other shells and everything. So they are born knowing how to eat. And you shouldn't have to cut off their feed just because they can go several days without eating. Now what I have here is starter feed. And when you start to feed your chicks, you're going to want to buy chick starter. And there are two different kinds of chick starter you can buy. One is going to be medicated and one is going to be unmedicated. And buying medicated versus unmedicated feed is going to depend on two factors. One, whether you're home raising your chicks or getting them from a hatchery, and then two, your personal preference. So if you order chicks from a hatchery, they have the option to vaccinate for coccidiosis. Coccidiosis is a deadly illness that chicks often get as they grow older into chickens. They become tolerant of it. They develop an immunity to it. But when they're baby chicks, they're very, very vulnerable. And they can get it very easily from just eating the feces of other chicks, which happens all the time because all chicks are doing is pecking at things. So you can choose to get your chicks vaccinated for coccidiosis or not. If you don't get them vaccinated at the hatchery and you order them in, you can do the medicated feed. And that's where the personal preference comes in. The medicated feed contains a medicine called amprolium, which prevents against coccidiosis in chicks. If you are incubating your chicks, obviously they're not going to be vaccinated unless you know how to vaccinate baby chicks. But like I said, you don't have to get a medicated feed for the prevention of coccidiosis. You can do things like put apple cider vinegar in their water, put a garlic clove in their water, use natural antibiotics such as that, or you can just buy the medicated feed. It is not a 100% chance that chicks are going to get coccidiosis, but it does help alleviate some of the stress if you want all your chicks to live. But beyond the vaccination, if you choose not to get them vaccinated or you raise them in an incubator at home, from then on, it is personal preference of whether you want to buy medicated feed for the prevention of coccidiosis or use natural methods or use nothing at all and just let nature take its course. I won't get into a debate about organic versus not organic or medicated or versus unmedicated or vaccinated versus not vaccinated. This is what I choose to do just to help these chicks out a bit. Of course, I will also actually put apple cider vinegar in their water. That's something that I do with all of my baby chicks when they come to me. Just a small amount, just a capful per their entire watering bucket, just to help their immune systems build. One caveat though is if you do get vaccinated chicks, vaccinated for coccidiosis, not Marek's disease, but coccidiosis specifically, you do not want to buy medicated feed and feed them to those chicks. Once they are vaccinated, they are good. They're prevented from having coccidiosis. But if you give them medicated feed after they've been vaccinated, the medication will actually counteract the vaccine and then they will be vulnerable again. So if you get them vaccinated at a hatchery, do not feed medicated feed, feed unmedicated feed. And the bags in the store are clearly labeled medicated versus unmedicated. So now that our little brooder is done, let's take it inside to these babies. I'll apologize in advance for the lighting because I have to keep the window closed for the chicks. But we've got our brooder set up right here next to the incubator, so when they're all dry and ready to go, it's just very simple to take them out and put them right where their new home will be. I've got the heater set up in here, which should be lowered to about the bird's head height. That way they're not huddling together to keep warm, and the heating element is as close to them as possible because they will need a lot of warmth these first few days. Now, as for the feeding bins that I'm using, the simplest thing that I found, they don't eat a lot, they don't drink a lot, they're tiny right now, are lids. This one, the shallower one, is going to be for their food, and this will be for their water. And this is just fine your first few days, even a week or two. They will not be using that much. You can use it even longer if you're going to be filling it up regularly, making sure that they have enough water and their food is always in there. But depending on how many hatch, I don't want 15 little chicks as they get bigger trying to struggle around this. And that's where I do have an actual feeding tray that I will use once they get big enough and tall enough that they can actually stick their heads down in there. But for now, this is all you need. This is it. You don't need a fancy feeder that costs $10 at Tractor Supply or a fancy water. you can just use whatever you have laying around the house. The main thing you want is something that's shallow enough that they will not drown in because they absolutely might. So this is the perfect size. It's a plastic mason jar lid that I use for my ferments and my pickling projects. And it's a bit deeper than this shallow metal tin one that used to be on a pickle jar. But this will be perfect for food, and this is good for water. And that is all you need to raise these little guys. Food, water, heat, and someplace safe to sleep. Babies. I will not be keeping the chicks inside once all of the ones that are gonna hatch are hatched. I'm actually gonna be keeping them here in the garage, and I'm gonna put the box within the box to keep them safe in. Hey baby, you like little chicks? Aww. 2 reasons for this. I have cats. And they are very curious, and I can't always keep that bedroom door closed and ensure that they're not going to get in there somehow. So it's just safer if they're out here in the garage. And secondly, it's still sweltering here in the desert. So this garage is actually pretty warm during the day. It's at least above 80 degrees, which will greatly help in getting them away from their little heater and exploring around their little coop, because it's hot enough in here. Dare I say, it's almost hot enough in here sometimes to not even have to keep a heater in here. But of course, the heater will be in there. They will be safe within this inception box within a box, and they will be awesome. I'm so excited for these guys. And once they outgrow their little plastic container, I will put them in here with fencing that I have to protect the top, and they will live out their first few months in here until they get too large, and they will go out into the chicken tractor. You pretty girl. What are you doing? So essentials for raising baby chicks: heat source, food, water, something soft to lay on, and of course protection from either the elements or the cats or the dogs. I'm pretty sure my dogs will be fine. They do fine with my chickens when they're out cruising. I'm not too worried about it. But it doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to buy this fancy brooder and fancy food and water. Just use what you got. They won't care. I promise you they won't care. But I'm gonna head inside and watch some of these chicks come out, and I will catch you guys on the next one.